Hey friends, welcome back to another video. My name is Lefebvre, and today we are covering the question that I actually get asked a lot from beginners. How do you know when to dip your paintbrush in water, and what brush size am I supposed to use? So today we're covering all the answers to those questions with a demonstration, so let's jump right in and start. Okay, so today we are talking about when to wet your brush. So I am giving you the full view of my workspace here, which means I'm not going to be zooming in to the painting, so you're not going to get a close-up of the brush strokes, because today we are focusing on when to add water to your brush or to just dip your brush in your water. I get that question a lot from beginners, and I think as beginners we tend to overthink things. And really, you just kind of have to feel it out, and, it's all about trial and error. So while I'm going to show you when I dip my brush in my water, doesn't necessarily mean that's when you need to as well, because our paintings are going to be different. We're going to be using different brushes, different paints. I may have more water on my brush than you do. So we're going to need to do it at different times. But I'm going to give you the tips on when to know when to add water to your brush. I hope that makes sense and I'm not just rambling. The other part to this video is a question I also get asked: how do you know what size brush to use? So I use mostly 3 different sizes of brushes. This is a size 10 by Craftamo, but usually my go-to is a size 12. And the brushes that I am creating with Craftamo will include a size 12, which is going to look like this. Which is nice and big, but usually I used to use my Princeton snap brush in a size 12, so that's kind of my large brush. And then my next size would be a size 6, which I have also in my Princeton snap brushes, which is also going to come in my Craftamo set. And then a size 2 for detail. So hint, hint, with my Craftamo set that's coming out hopefully soon, I will have my go-to sizes. But how do you know which size to use? Let me break it down for you. The bigger the surface area you are trying to cover, the bigger the brush. So if you are doing large flowers, you're not going to use a small brush. It's going to take longer, which means it's going to give the paper more time to dry, which is not ideal. We want to keep it wet for as long as we can, especially if we're trying to, achieve color bleeds and really nice blends. If it dries faster, then you're kind of out of luck with that. So if you're covering a large surface area like a background or a sky, you're going to want to use a bigger brush. So in that instance, I actually tend to use a mop brush so I can wet a large area all at the same time so it stays nice and wet. For my florals, I tend to use my biggest brush so I can get those nice big petals. And once you kind of get used to the sizes and water control a bit better, you can actually use the bigger brushes for detail as well. So you have these really nice tips and points where you can achieve those little leaves and all those detailed areas. So you don't need a smaller brush. But the trouble that you run into with that as a beginner is that if you have too much water on your brush, you might end up with bigger water blobs and then blooms. So that comes into getting familiar with water control. So in that sense, if you're a beginner, I always suggest to use a smaller brush for smaller detail. So that's kind of how you know what size brush to use. The bigger the surface area, use a bigger brush. The smaller the surface area that you're trying to cover, the smaller the brush. So little details. It's just easier with a smaller brush. So today I'm using my size 10 Craftamo because I don't have a size 12 that I'm using yet. That one that I showed you was a sample that I'm trying to keep nice and clean. But my size 10 is pretty good, and a size 10 is a good option. Also, look at the size of your paper. So I am painting on my Stonehenge Aqua Cold Press. Cold press watercolor paper. It's not my favorite paper, but I thought it was a really good size for today's painting because I want to make sure I have everything in view for you guys. So that's what I'm using. So obviously I'm using a smaller surface area, so I don't need a massive brush. If I was doing a large floral painting, I would probably use my size 12, like this big big brush, which I love. So just kind of think of it that way. And I also suggest for beginners to work on smaller surface areas. It's just a little bit easier to kind of get the hang of it. And also, you don't waste as much paper that way. So like your good Arches high quality watercolor paper, I always chop it up into quarters. It's easier to work on smaller paper and you're not wasting lots of paper. Okay, so now that we talked about brush sizes, let's get into when you have to add water to your brush. The first time you will ever have to do it is when your brush is completely dry. So we want to make sure it is nice and wet. You're not dipping it in once. It doesn't give enough time for the bristles to really soak in that water, so it's going to be kind of dry. Swish it around in there. Swish that brush. Also, you'll notice I have 2 water jars. Some people use it for dirty water and then clean water to pick up. I usually use it for cool and warm colors. So if I'm, mixing or pinks and reds, I'll use this to clean it off. And then greens, I'll do this jar, because if you are mixing contrasting colors, so red and green, you're going to get brown, muddy water, and you'll most likely get muddy colors. So I use it cool and warm, whatever it ends up being, but you could also use a dirty water jar and then pick up clean. So totally up to you. Okay, so our brush is nice and wet. Now we need to wet up our paints. Now you can either do that with your brush just by adding water in there. You want a nice puddle, or you can add water by using a small spray, which I also do. I haven't planned out what color I'm using for this. But yeah, that's the first time. So I'm going to try to go nice and slow because, like I said, this is second nature to me now, and it will become second nature to you too. You'll start dipping your paintbrush in water and just not even thinking about it with the more practice you have. But I'm going to try and slow it down and explain as I go. So my paintbrush is nice and wet. My paint's nice and wet. There's a little puddle in my color, which is what you want. And we're just going to start painting. Okay, so let's start with a rose, my go-to. Okay, and I'm noticing my paintbrush is kind of wet. Like it's pooling a little bit, which is okay because I want that color nice and concentrated there. And I'm gonna start moving it around. Now I want to lighten the colors. So this is the second time that I am going to dip my paintbrush in water to lighten a color. I'm gonna just take some of that pigment off and continue going around. You'll see me doing that a lot. If you're paying attention to like when I dip my paintbrush in my water a lot in my paintings, it's to lighten a color. Okay. Not a fan of this paper that much, but it works. Okay. Then I am going to choose another color. So the third time we dip it in there is to wash off the color. Okay. First is to get your brush wet. Second is to maybe lighten a color. And then third is to wash it off to get a new pigment. So let's add a little bit of yellow to our peach here, and we'll do a peach flower. Oops, okay, this is another time. See, I'm trying to stop myself. I did a stroke here, and I'm noticing it is way too dry. You want a nice wet stroke. It's already dry here. I'm gonna dip my paintbrush in water. It wasn't wet enough. That's more what we want. That's another time I'll do it, okay? Again, I'm just dipping it in there to really spread out that color. It is fairly light in color, so I'm gonna pick up more color there. But that's another time when your paintbrush is too dry or your color is too dry. Okay, so that was a perfect example of that. Okay, and then sometimes I will dip or dab my paintbrush on my paper towel to take off some excess water if it's too watery. Okay, and then I'm going to grab a bit more color, like so. Again, we're washing it off, and then let's do, I don't know, a more yellowy flower. Okay, I want to add a bit more water just to make sure it's nice and wet. I'll do another rose. Okay, I want to lighten the color, take off some of that pigment. You can usually dry it against the side of your jar if you think there's too much water. That goes with our water control videos, which I will try and link below. But if somehow I forget, look up Emma Lefebvre water control and you'll find it. But I want it fairly wet because this paper doesn't seem to stay wet as long, so I'm adding more water. And I also want it to be nice and light. Okay. There we go. Okay, again, washing off our brush. A lot of people, well, not a lot of people, I've had people say, why do you tap it on the bottom of the jar? That's so bad for it. It's not great for your brush, but I haven't had a brush fail me yet, and I've been painting for years, so it's fine. Okay, so I dipped it in there again. I'm getting a new color. There is a little bit of a puddle, and I'm moving it over here, but it seemed a bit too dry in there, so I added a little bit of water. Okay, it's all about a feeling you get. So people will say, well, I want to know when you dip your paintbrush in during this painting so I can do it at the same time too. The thing is that my painting may have more water, or my paintbrush may have more water on it, or my paper or my paints than yours does. So when I dip my paintbrush, you might not need to. So that's why I don't always show when I dip my paintbrush, because I don't find it's always necessary in that specific painting, because that's not necessarily when you need to as well. It really depends on how much paint and water you already have on your brush. Okay, but I'm just trying to explain when I would do it. Okay, so I added a bit more water, I think there, did I? I can't even tell anymore. Okay, my paintbrush is still fairly wet. This paint is a little bit more dry, so I might add a bit more water to it, just a bit. Let's get a darker green going. Okay, but also the rule is you don't want to bring your paintbrush over if it's full of pigment and water and it's dripping. If you can see it's starting to pool at the tip of your brush, you don't want to put it on your paper, because then it's going to cause a big pool on your paper, which is not ideal. Okay. I will link the water control videos as well, because those are important and definitely a struggle with beginners and even myself at times. Something you need to just practice and learn, and you will get the hang of. Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to wash off my brush. I have green on my brush, so I'm dipping it into my cool jar. Those are where my pinks and reds were. This is where it's going to be like my greens and blues. Okay, and purples. All right, let's add a bit of purple. I think I did this painting the other day for a different video. It's like my go-to composition. 3 flowers and then some fillers. So we're going to go like this. So I keep dabbing, and I'm seeing I'm kind of running out of color. Add more, and if you need to add a bit of water, you can, which I'm going to do to grab more pigment. Okay. Maybe I'll have one over here too. Like that. And then I'm going to wash off my brush, run it against the side because I really don't want water on it. And I'm even going to dab it on my paper towel so there's not water. And I'm just going to drag my kind of dryish brush through to move some of that pigment to look like a stem through the middle of the purple flowers. Okay. Again, washing my brush off. Let's create some like little yellow blooms. So I haven't wet up this color yet, so I'm doing that now. You might need to add a bit more water. Oops, should have been in this jar, but that's fine. Okay. I'm gonna do some little yellow buds. And if it's ever too wet in an area, it's like pooling, dab your paintbrush on your paper towel. And then you can kind of lift up some of that color. I'm gonna grab some of this peach, just tap it in to the tops of these buds. Like that. Let's wash off our color. And then I'm gonna do some small stems, so I'm gonna grab a smaller brush. My size 6 is just what I have on hand, so we got to wet it up because it's completely dry. Make sure it's nice and wet. I'm going to dab it on my paper towel because we are working with a small area. We don't want a lot of water on our brush. And I'm gonna pick up this color. We don't want a lot of water because it's gonna bleed like crazy into the bud if there's too much water. I'll show you what that's like. If you have too much water, see how it kind of takes over a bit more than we'd like. Let's lift that up. That's fine. Then we have to wash off our brush. Grab our yellow again. I just dabbed it on my paper towel to take off some of the excess water. Go over it like that. Okay, wash it off. Dry it because we're doing a small detailed area. We don't want a lot of water. Make sure there is water, like the paint that you're using is wet. You don't want to go in with a dry brush to a dry paint. So make sure you do already have a puddle. If not, add the water first, wash off your brush, dry it, and then pick up the paint. Okay, we're gonna do some small little buds. These have already started to dry because I was explaining, so they might not have the same color bleed as I would usually like. Not too bad though. We're just gonna do some small little details. So it is a lot easier with a smaller brush. And size 6 is kind of my go-to for smaller detail. Size 2, I actually don't use it all that often. That is like my preference, that's the word I was trying to say, for a small detailed brush. And it's also great for watercolor lettering. That's like my go-to size for that. But you can do a lot of detail with a nice pointed, like it just has to have a really nice point to your smaller size 6 brush to get that detailed lines. Okay, we're just adding. Like that, washing off my brush because I'm going to pick up a different color. Let's grab a bit of yellow for the center of this flower, like so. And there you go. So now we're washing off our brush and drying it. So once you're done your painting and you're done with your paintbrush, do not leave it in your water. You can wash it off just in your water like that, rinse it, and then leave it on your paper towel to lay flat. Or if you have some sort of cool contraption, like I have here, it's a brush holder. You can stick it in there. And the best way is to hang it upside down. I can also link this below. This is from an Etsy shop, which is awesome. Okay, and there you go. There is your painting, and I hope that was informative and kind of gave you a better idea of when to use more water added to your brush and what size brushes to use. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. I really hope you liked it, and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on Instagram for even more. Have a great day, guys. Bye!